WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. The hat out front should tell you. All of our WNST work here brought to you by our friends at Taharka Ice Cream, Pizza John's, and, of course, it is Chicken Palooza month around here. I'm losing weight. I'm probably walking a lot. I probably should just eat more fried chicken is what I need to do during Chicken Palooza. Luke Jones is here. He is in Pennsylvania monitoring all things Orioles, but now things are getting a little weird because baseball's back. Maybe it's back. We'll see how sick the Marlins are and every other team, the NBA, the NHL trying to ramp it up. But football, our bread and butter, even though I have the Maryland Sporticulture light out right now and I've retired the Ravens one for the week, I just felt like yellow, not purple this week. Football doing this. Luke, where are you now that we're calling the troops in and Brett Favre's golfing with the president?
Well, we're going to find out. In speaking about this for the last few months, it's been all hypothetical. It's been wondering if the NFL and the Players Association would have a fight like Major League Baseball. There was some contention, but clearly they were on the same page far more quickly than what we saw with baseball. So that was nice to see. But now you need to implement this. Now guys are going to be showing up at the facility. Now you're going to have this COVID reserve list that we saw the first members of it on Sunday night, one of them being Ravens undrafted rookie safety Nigel Warrior. So we're going to have positive tests. We've talked about this with baseball. Obviously, basketball and hockey are a different element with the bubble and basically trying to play a playoff schedule, and that's basically it. NBA's playing.
How about hockey, where like they won't let us in and we won't let them? I mean,
it's crazy, right? This is as much as we're all so tired and fatigued from hearing these are challenging, unprecedented times. These are challenging, unprecedented times.
Hey, man, I'm not laughing at it. I mean, I'm in the middle of it. We're all caught in the whirlpool, and it's all spinning toward the drain, right?
Sure. Anyone who laughs about it, it's because we have to cope with it in some way. But
because I sit here the other 23 hours of the day and don't laugh about it.
Sure. But now that we're in a position where rookies have shown up, veterans are going to be showing up, initial testing is going to take place this week in Owings Mills and in training facilities around the NFL. Now we see what this looks like. Now we see what the baseline is in terms of players testing positive, keeping in mind you have 90-man rosters and in most cases going to be trimmed down to 80-man rosters. Because of the logistics and the rules that are in place. We know there aren't going to be any preseason games. We know that there's going to be a substantial ramp-up period where they'll have, 8 days, I think it is, of strength and conditioning. They'll have 4 days or 5 days, I guess it is, of phase 2, which is practice with no helmets or no pads, I should say, essentially OTAs, kind of condensed into roughly a week. And then in mid-August, we will have padded practices. So it's definitely a different kind of preseason. I'm sure John Harbaugh and many old school coaches privately don't like it. But I think for this to work, for this to be pulled off, one, there's an acknowledgement that it's going to look very different. Two, there has to be a cooperation. Everyone has to be pulling the rope in the same direction. And I thought it was interesting to see and I saw this specifically with the Ravens players, but this happened around the league when some of the protocols and some of the rules started trickling out over the weekend or prior to the weekend even. You saw some young players. I even saw Patrick Queen, the Ravens' first-round pick, kind of reacting to like, oh, my goodness.
Well, and I got flipping back with him because I'm 52 and have been around the block a few times. Like, if you think you're going clubbing in Baltimore and you're going to play football,
sure,
that's just not going to happen. But I think most of these guys are coming from a place where they haven't been wearing masks, where it's just been cool to hang out on my jet ski and do the North Carolina thing a couple weeks ago really woke me up to how willfully ignorant places have been because their politics have been a mess, because we've been a mess, and now they're going to come to a place where they might have rules. Like, I saw Nigel Warrior, pop positive, and I had to figure out he was Dale Carter's kid, right, who I saw running around here playing football. We got kids of kids of kids beyond Zeus at this point, right, playing here. But, if that's Lamar Jackson, we're in a different place, and we're not far away from that, right? Like what the Marlins were this weekend, and, I saw, was it Alex Cobb last week? And I know we talked a little bit about him earlier. I think it was him, because I only hear the voices, and they're not really good at resetting, and it's not like Scott Garceau was ever any good at doing sports radio. So, like, they're interviewing people, and Elias has a mask on, and I can't hear anything. But I think it was Cobb, and he said, I'm trying to stay away from my teammates. Like, he's like, the pitchers are here, and I haven't seen any of the position players. You know, like, literally, we're trying to stay away from each other so we can play. And football's not built that way, man. Like, and these guys aren't built that way. And I've been around it, and the building's not built that way. And politically, the people who run it aren't built that way. And I'm going to continue to say this, and it's not because I'm negative or I'm being a jerk or an ass, or, I mean, this is Baltimore positive. This is a real recipe for disaster when a kid like Patrick Queen goes out on the internet and already is questioning sort of the baseline things of all the stuff I've been doing for 6 months. Like this should come as a shock that you shouldn't be out at the clubs. I mean, what do you think you're going to find when you get here? I mean, nothing's open. There is nothing to do, right? And there's nothing but football. And that's what they say every year, right? But then Chris McAllister's drinking and driving at 3 a.m. in Virginia, and something happens here and something happens there. And, you know, it's training camp was hey, go back to Hard Knocks. It was a wild time. You know what I mean? Go back and watch it. This is going to be much, much more serious than the seriousness of what John's trying to run out there to begin with, right? In regard to team, and we're all in it together, and wash your hands on the way in, and don't do anything to embarrass us. Now it's going to be, don't pump gas. You know, don't get out of your car. These guys are going to have a hard time dealing with that.
Well, they're going to have to pump gas. You know,
Got it.
Everyone's pumping gas is going.
And then
anyway,
Nigel Warrior tests positive, and there we go.
But here we go. First of all, I think we do have to understand this, and this is where it's going to be critical for the John Harbaughs of the world, for the Calais Campbells of the world, to
the grown-ups,
to not just be grown-ups, but to communicate in a constructive way. It's very easy for you in your early 50s to recognize the risks here. It's easier for me in my mid-30s to recognize the risks here that someone in their early 20s who, even if they read up on it, there are far more people that are older that are dealing with the more serious repercussions of this virus. However, that's where you need to communicate the risks. And even if it's a case where you say, all right, and I don't want to pick on Patrick Queen too much here, because he is not alone at all in you know, his eyeball emoji.
Well, I had to play the old man role. Let Harbaugh go play that with him. You know what I'm saying? Because that's that's how it's going to go. Let Wink Martindale play that with him.
But my point here is this is just like being a parent. I'm not a parent, but I recognize it because I have, you know, my mother and my father when I was growing up, that you have to communicate this in the proper way. If it just becomes such a combative, you're wrong at this and you're wrong at this and you're being irresponsible. First of all, we know that people can test positive when they take all the proper precautions. And I think we've all gotten really good, too good, in fact, to a fault, I think, at telling other people what to do, what to think, and how to feel about things. So that's where I think communication has to be so incredibly important here, where you have coaches who are conveying this. You have veterans who are conveying this, not just a case of you're going to ruin this and you can't do this and you can't do this and you can't do this. All that is true, but you have to communicate it in a way to say, hey, look, Patrick or Devin Duvernay or J.K. Dobbins, whoever it is, or someone that's in their third year in the league, or let's be honest about this, some 10th-year veteran who still likes to go to the club and have fun and get out.
Well, I mean, I'll give you two words. So, Earl Thomas. Let's do that. Yes.
So the point is that's where you need leadership and accountability and good messaging to say, look, you might test positive for this and you might be completely fine. You might be asymptomatic. You might not have any idea. But the trickle-down impact of that is not just the potential of getting someone else sick, let alone something worse than that, but you want to get paid, right? You worked all these years, you worked your tail off to get to the NFL, and you want to get paid. If we don't have games, you don't get paid. So I think there are appeals to their own interests that you make here. And to be clear, I'm not saying you coddle young guys, but I think you do have to have proper messaging. And that's the same challenge a John Harbaugh in his 50s encounters every single year on how is he relating to a 23-year-old Lamar Jackson.
Well, on every one of these issues that involve their loins, their money, their bling, their fame, their supernatural powers, their, all of that he has to tamp down every year. Sure. Now he's got to contain all of that with a pathogen.
But I think that's where you have to create, and it's a cliche to say this, but that's where you have to create the bunker mentality that has always existed in football to some degree, but it's even more critical now. If you're going to pull this off, you guys need to be careful. And especially if you're talking about Lamar Jackson or Patrick Mahomes or Aaron Rodgers or whoever. I mean, when you're talking about the quarterback, clearly the most important player on the field, the most important player in the organization, it becomes even more important for them. If it's the last guy on the roster, yeah, that individual's not as important, but if what they do compromises Lamar Jackson or Jimmy Smith or Marlon Humphrey or Ronnie Stanley, then
we talk about things forever about like you bring your problems into my clubhouse, right? Like you get arrested, you got a gun, you beat your wife, whatever it is. We have to hear questions about that. You act like a jerk on the sidelines. I mean, this is the story of Antonio Brown, right? Or any of these Terrell Owens where everything in the clubhouse was about their oxygen. This is even more like that to say, if you bring this pathogen in here, it will infect all of us. It's not I'm going to get questions at the locker. It's we're not going to be able to play against the Texans next month. So now that they're actually doing this, like literally, you know what I mean? Like that they're in and we're seeing these players react and we're seeing the coaches react and we're seeing baseball players pee dirty and get thrown out and planes that can't leave Philadelphia for Miami on the first weekend. I should say that this football thing, from an experiment standpoint, really on a daily basis, this is going to bear watching because they're going to be in buildings together and they're not bubbled out. And I don't know what they're doing with their wives and their children or, like what every guy's plan would be and roommates and all of that sort of stuff, because most of these guys live with each other a lot of the time, the younger players, not to mention on top of each other, not to mention sitting next to each other, not to mention touching the same things. I've been in that building a lot, man. And I don't, this is not an essential business, and they're going to find that out when they get going next to each other, how difficult this is going to be. I watch it with that sort of Willy Wonka, don't drink the chocolate. You'll fall in the fountain. No, now what do you want me to do? Baseball's into that now because they've revved this thing up and they've started it. At least with football, they got 5 more weeks, right? Like before they're really going to play, to get all this out of their system, to get all their dirty tests, to get the offensive line of the Cardinals shut down for 2 weeks, in August, to figure out whether they can do this or not. This is, I don't know that Eric DeCosta and John Harbaugh really, really believe they're going to play football the first week of September. They're going to point toward that, but I think deep in their soul, they have to look at this times 32 and see their challenges in their own building and realize that this is the hardest thing they've ever tried to do. They think winning a Super Bowl is hard. Just trying to get the team to the field every Sunday is going to be a Herculean task. And if you doubt that, ask the Miami Marlins, where they're playing amidst Alex Cobb saying, I haven't even met the shortstop yet because I'm not allowed to get within 6 feet of him. And that's not normal, but that's the way we're going to play baseball right now. You can't play football that way.
And you just said it. That's what it has to be. You have to understand that it's not going to be a normal season. If this is going to work, that's where everyone has to embrace it. And that's where I'll defend a Patrick Queen for his comment on Twitter, because John Harbaugh roughly a month ago was bashing the social distancing guidelines and saying it was going to be impossible. And look, I understand John saying that because he's done this a long time and he's really darn good at what he does. But again, it goes back to the recognition that if this is going to be pulled off, it's going to look unlike anything we've seen in the National Football League. And it is going to be different. And you're not going to have your 53 guys and 10 practice squad members, now upwards of 16, I guess it is now. You're not going to have those guys all sitting in a room together watching tape. It's all going to be done either remotely, or it's going to be done in small group settings, or they're going to be meeting outside to go over things. So it is very different in that way, and you have to embrace that. That's the only way this is going to work, is if you recognize that this is going to look very different than it normally does. And to go back to what you said about John Harbaugh and Eric DeCosta, I'm inclined to think they can pull it off. I think the Dick Casses of the NFL are the ones probably looking at this privately and really wondering just how feasible, just how practical, just how realistic is it that we're going to be able to pull this off. And we're going to start to find out. We'll get an idea as far as baseline testing, see how many players are positive, see how that goes. They obviously have their numbers in place as far as how long players quarantine and how long they have to go without experiencing symptoms and negative tests. So the way it looks now, and I apologize, I don't have this all memorized at this point because we know, but the way it looks now, if someone tests positive during the season, it looks like they're going to miss two games and that's assuming that they're not having serious lingering symptoms with this, as can be the case. So it's definitely going to be different, and it's not going to be fair. There are going to be teams that are hit especially hard. And I think in Roger Goodell's case, in the same way that Rob Manfred is going to be dealing with that maybe in the next 24 hours, less than that, talking about the Marlins with the Orioles right now. It's trying to figure out how to proceed. Do you postpone a game? Do you make a team push through and you just kind of have to chalk it up to say, all right, they had 3 players test positive, but they have 5 other cornerbacks on the roster. They have 8 other offensive linemen on the roster, and they have 5 other defensive linemen on the roster. And it stinks that 2 of those guys are Pro Bowl players, but you kind of almost view it in that context, a football context. Let me be clear about that. I'm not trying to be insensitive to what we're talking about here, because we all know it's a pandemic. But in that context, you almost have to view it as they got hurt, because that happens in the context.
Well, that's the way they're going to think about it. I mean, except it's contagious.
But the difference here is when it's 3 or 4 players at 3 or 4 different positions, that's a different animal than saying 4/5 of Lamar Jackson's starting offensive line tested positive. That's when you're going to have to see Roger Goodell potentially make a call to say, we're going to have to postpone this. And I know Peter King wrote about this over at NBC Sports.
By the way, he's going to be on the show a little bit later on this week.
That's where you might have a scenario where you almost have to have an open week or 2 at the end of the regular season to potentially make up games. I mean, baseball has always made up games, but the NFL's never really had that kind of problem, other than a few isolated weather type incidents, or I guess what happened in Minneapolis with the roof several years back. But they might have to have a week 18 or a week 19 to make up the week 5 game that Kansas City had to that the NFL had to postpone because Kansas City had 4/5 of their offensive line test positive, or 5/6 of their wide receiver group test positive. I mean, these are all very strange scenarios, and I'm not going to sit here and say that I have the right answers for it or whether it's going to be pulled off. But the overwhelming theme here is to recognize it's not going to be normal, and to understand coaches and organizations, and they've already done the work for this, and they will continue to do the work for this. If it's going to continue, they're going to have to think outside the box. And that's where you get into, do you quarantine your quarterback basically from everyone else on the roster? Because we all know that the Ravens are sunk if Lamar Jackson can't play, or maybe not sunk, but they're
you get to the value of the player, right? Like literally, it is an injury.
Always been that way. Yeah, and it's always been that way. So as much as that sounds cold and saying, well, we're talking about a pandemic, the best players on the team have always been more valuable than everyone else, and so we see guys who get arrested that are stars in the league don't get cut right away, whereas the guy that's the last player on the roster, he's going to get released if he gets popped for doing something, gets arrested, depending on what it might be. So it is very different. It is definitely an environment where it's not going to go perfectly, but how many of those variables can you control, and how much can you get your guys to buy in? And the teams that have the best leadership, the best messaging, and the most maturity are the teams that have the best chance of pulling this off. And in turn, when we get to that point, if we get to that point, those are going to be the teams that have the best chance to win, because the teams that have young players who don't take it seriously, they're either going to have full-blown outbreaks, or at the very least, they're going to have individuals missing a lot, testing positive and missing games. And that's where you get into the conversation as far as you can talk next man up all you want, but when you're down to guys that are on the practice squad or guys you're signing that are on the street previously, you're not going to win many games. We've seen that with the 2015 Ravens come to mind immediately. So it's definitely going to be challenging. And I think the teams that recognize that and embrace that and accept that are going to be the ones who have the best chance to pull this off, to not only be able to play, but to be successful in the process.
Looking on our website right now on the back end, at like the NFL page up at WNST.net, I'm looking like at the front page, and I see all the dates for September 3rd. It says cancel. It's a preseason schedule, right?
Yeah.
And I look down, and the game is Baltimore at Washington, and it has a little purple Ravens logo, next to it. And I look at the Washington logo, and it's sort of this burgundy block with a big yellow W in it.
Yeah.
And W's not for win.
No.
It might be an L for lose.
Certainly
but,
not.
Is there anything you want to, you want to dump a little kerosene onto that fire? I mean, I certainly could, should, would. The sexual harassment, the whole notion of how that organization has been run, people I've known in that organization and how it's been run. And we talk about Angelos here or Donald Sterling or bad owners or owners that don't care or owners that throw in the towel. Snyder's the guy who's always trying to win, right? And at what cost? And it's such an embarrassment to the league. And I guess a league that's played football games in Carson in a soccer rink, right? A league that's had Jerry Richardson, a league that's blackballed a Super Bowl starting quarter, literally blackballed in front of everyone, blackballed a quarterback. On the Black Lives Matter movement, that this is just the latest embarrassment, but I wonder if Snyder's going to survive this and how all this turns out, because it's kind of like the Orioles. The Redskins have been so bad for so long. Like, I don't know what other than a heart transplant would really fix it. I don't think it's about the name or the colors or whether they want to call themselves the Red Hawks or the Red Warriors or the Redskins or whether it's politically correct or politically incorrect. I just think it's him. And the way it's been run and the way that this has been orchestrated, right, over the last couple of months to sort of coincide with these horrific allegations within his own organization, just an embarrassment to the league, the Washington football franchise.
I'm not going to disagree with you on that. I mean, certainly the allegations, and when there's something like this, you wonder if there's more to come out at some point in time. I think plenty of people have spoken to that, and it's very concerning. You don't get the sense at this point in time, and we're talking in late July, that could change dramatically in a matter of weeks, as we've seen stories of this nature play out, even in other sports a little bit differently. But you don't get the sense right now that there's movement within the league to force him out. But we've talked about a lot of things changing in the last several months. So maybe I'm wrong on that. Maybe he will be pushed out at some point in the not too distant future. As far as the name thing, I mean, we touched on that before. I actually think renaming yourself temporarily as the Washington football team is actually a smart move. Why rush into a name? Why rush into a logo? Why rush into a new brand when very clearly you didn't intend to do this? I think that's obvious. It's not as though Daniel Snyder had some wholesome change of heart. This is all pressure from sponsors, and this is all financially based. So from that standpoint, do what the Baltimore CFL Colts did the first year when the NFL sued them, and they became what? The Baltimore Football Club, and then they dubbed them the Stallions some time after that. So that part of it, I don't care one way or the other. I actually agree with them doing that part of it. If you're changing the name, don't rush into it. But as far as the rest of it, and like you said, the name in the long term, that's a fairly inconsequential part of this equation. It's how do you treat people? How is your organization run? What does it look like in terms of on the field, which that has been woeful too for the last 25, 30
You know what's
years.
amazing is when you buy like a great brand in a box, like Peter Angelos did. You know, Peter
Sure.
Angelos bought Camden Yards, Cal Ripken, Brooks Robinson, the history that he bought all the American League East, the Yankees and the Red Sox coming every year. You know, he bought the Washington. He had it all, and at every turn pissed it away. And when I think of Dan Snyder, I'm thinking like you've defamed everything that was ever good about the organization, heralded everything that was George Preston Marshall and sort of awful about the name. You've been tone deaf to everything. You've pulled down the shades. You've offended every media member you've ever met. You've offended most of the sponsors you've ever met. You've offended certainly the Joe Sixpack fan, charging for practices in Richmond, and just all of these horrible things that the guy's done. And somehow, some way, and what I've learned, especially when you have billions of dollars, is, and I was foolish enough to think Free the Birds would change Peter Angelos. Like, I was nuts to think that, like, somehow shameless people could be shamed. I mean, look at the guy running the country. Like, they're dishonorable people, especially when they're wealthy, they stay dishonorable. And nothing changes that. So from that perspective, and I've learned this with Angelos here, and even though he's eating pudding right now, and I'm not allowed to say that, with Snyder, he's a young guy, and if the other partners want out and FedEx went, this is a bigger story than that, I think, for the league, to say what's good for the league, what's good for the brand, and the league fought this with Al Davis for years, right? And certainly with Peter Angelos in a lawsuit that's now 15 years old, that Peter Angelos, even while he's sitting at the top of the building eating pudding, his controls how screwed up the baseball thing is. From that perspective, when you got a bad egg, they have a hard time getting rid of Donald Sterling and Jerry Richardson historically. I don't know where that is now or how bad they would want to get rid of Daniel Snyder. But if they want to fix Washington football, they got to get rid of Daniel Snyder. And I'll leave it at that. I guess that's my drop the mic on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to disagree with you there. I mean, the results or lack thereof speak for themselves. I mean, I think about myself. I was born in 1983. The Redskins were, the Washington football team. We're all going to say that for a while, but that was a franchise that won 3 Super Bowls in a decade. I mean, they were, when I was a kid growing up, you didn't think of the Patriots or even the Green Bay Packers. The Steelers dynasty was long since gone at that point in time. I thought of the 49ers, I thought of the New York Giants, and I thought of Washington. I mean, those were the teams that had a lot of success in the 80s and early 90s. And to see what they've become, whereas, the Giants have won 2 more Super Bowls since then, been to another. 49ers won more Super Bowls one in 94 with Steve Young. They've been back to a couple Super Bowls at the very least. But look at where Washington's been.
Well, it used to be Redskins Cowboys when you were born. Now it's Ravens Steelers. I mean, from an NFL's perspective.
Sure. I mean, it's still a legacy rivalry, but I mean, that team has lacked relevance for a really long time. The only thing that's kept them relevant at all is their market size and their history, but that only goes so far. So, but to get back to your point, as far as the other owners, this is the problem that the cash cow that the NFL is, unless it can be clearly proven that someone becomes a financial liability. These guys aren't going to rock the boat. And
they got a guy in Cleveland might be going to prison.
Well, and that's my thing. Even from a moral and ethical standpoint, these guys tend to not rock the boat unless it is so over the top and it is so obvious that it's going to hurt the bottom line.
Like, obviously, like if you had a Chinese prostitute on her knees in a brothel, like that sort of thing, right?
Sure. But,
on video, right? That sort of thing.
But that's the point. But Washington, that football team, I don't know the exact numbers. I'd just be guessing, but they've remained very profitable. Or Dan Snyder wouldn't still be the owner because either he would have gotten out of it, and we know he hasn't done that, or the league would have forced him out. So that's where you do get into the whole conversation. Look, ethically speaking, yeah, I don't think there's any doubt he should be out of there. And even before this latest scandal, there was plenty of smoke there to say that this is not a healthy organization. So, but if they've been profitable and they're making money, and you look at where they're probably appraised in Forbes' list, I'm guessing they're still much higher than a lot of teams in the league, then that's when 31 other owners just kind of say, even if privately they're biting their lip and kind of gnashing their teeth a little bit, they look at the bottom line and say, well, okay, we're not going to rock the boat here. And whether that's right or wrong, that appears to be the reality, at least for the time being.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke, and Luke at WNST.net. We are merging Baltimore Positive and WNST.net here through the month. We're going to have a brand new, awesome website for you and an incredible experience. We're going to be giving you out on social as well. And certainly Luke's following the Orioles, when they play, if they play, how they play. And, of course, the Ravens getting back out to Owings Mills. It's been about 6 months where we have not had the ability to do that, so we are appreciative. And I'll be eating some Taharka ice cream and celebrating Chicken Palooza with our friends at Royal Farms. I am Nestor. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live all over the world. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and Baltimore Positive.